All right. Hello, everyone. My name's Jennifer Boblitz. I'm the Executive Director of Homefront Strong. Today, we are honoring Veterans Day by highlighting the story of a veteran who was a dear member of the Homefront Strong family and fierce advocate for veterans, Roy Dennington. Roy was a Vietnam veteran who once served as the chair of our board of directors, in addition to his many activities, including a deep involvement with yoga warriors. Roy passed away in February of 2024 before we could fully record his story. So today we're speaking with his daughter, Lee Dennington, as we honor his memory and dedication to those who serve. So hello, Lee. I only had the honor of knowing your dad for a handful of years, but in that time, I really got to know him as a compassionate, fierce advocate who was deeply intellectual and dedicated to well, one, sharing yoga warriors with everybody and his healing journey. But today I want to get to know your dad a little bit more. So tell us, who was Roy? What was your dad like?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think that the words you used are just so spot on. He was, in his later years, incredibly dedicated to helping veterans, and not only veterans, but also EMTs and, folks in that field heal from what I have learned are the invisible wounds of war. So growing up, I really didn't feel like I was part of a veteran family. Talking about Vietnam was not something you did. I have a memory of when I was really young, probably early elementary school, asking him about like having a gun in a war.
Mm,
And it
mm.
was very quickly obvious that like that was not something you asked about. I was little, so I didn't know. And I really didn't know him as a veteran and feel like I was a veteran daughter until probably like my mid 20s when he got involved in all of this stuff.
And what was that like? Was there a moment you remember when it kind of hit you that, Roy was a veteran?
Actually, yeah. My family experienced a really tragic loss of my mom's sister, and that is when and the whole family, sort of coped with that in different ways and found different ways to heal. And incidentally, that incident is what made him somehow find yoga warriors. And my mom told me, I don't know why I associate the two. They may not be connected at all, but I associate them. And my mom said to me many months later, yoga warrior saved your dad. And I
Mhm.
had, because it wasn't something that I grew up talking about, I had no idea that he needed saving, and that he was harboring this PTSD. And I have a vivid memory of a father-daughter tough conversation because I was probably a hot-headed 23-year-old. Um, and he started talking about it. And we separated that evening and got together the next morning. And I said, I feel like I'm meeting you as a friend, not a daughter. And for him and I, that opened up this way to like really get to know each other in his older adult life and my young adult life. And my siblings didn't, they had other things going on for whatever reason. I was the one that kind of joined him on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. I remember your dad as he was always sharing with others. I know he was a publisher, right? And he loved his books and he was always sharing. When I met him through veterans mediation and veterans mediation training, I remember him bringing in these books he would talk
Uh-huh.
about like the next weekend, and he was always sharing books about healing and he had this way about him. He just kind of touched everybody he met. You could tell when you were speaking to him that he was listening. He was really listening, and he always had something super thoughtful and profound to share. So I know he had a huge impact on me. Um, Even long after, our training together, he was always introducing me to all these wonderful people. Actually, that's how I became involved with Homefront Strong, which was then known as Brookfield Institute, because
Oh,
again,
yes. Yep.
your dad was on our board on the board at that
Yep.
time. And I had to know Beverly Presswood Taylor, the founder. So he had decided that we had to know each other, and that's
That's him.
yeah, that's where he led me. So I'm curious, what was his impact on you and your family and the community around him? What was that?
You know, he growing up, he worked. He was a worker and he provided for his family. And that's just what it was like. But then after he retired, he had to retire early because of medical issues with non-cancerous brain tumors. And that's kind of when he became really involved with a church and then the veterans organizations, particularly Brookfield and Homefront Strong. And he to what you're saying, he touched people. And he my brother Jason and I joke about this, that when you would call him and ask for him advice about something, or not even, you're actually, you know what, weren't even asking for advice. You're just calling to complain about something. And he would and offer some philosophical, intellectual suggestion or response. And there were times where in the moment you're like, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for you to just let me complain. But he kind of didn't let you off the hook that way. And I think my impression since he passed away, and hearing from so many veterans, that he touched them in that way. He affected them in that way. He listened to each person and he truly, truly dedicated the later parts of his life to the veteran community.
Yeah.
And through that, I've had the pleasure of meeting you and Belinda, and so many others who he just embraced and who embraced him because he was kind of kooky. He's a kooky guy in the best way.
Yes, absolutely. And I can completely, see that. And that's definitely the Roy that I knew in the short amount of time I knew him. He had all this wisdom.
Mhm.
Um, but he had a great sense of humor too.
Yes.
And he told stories. He was a master storyteller. Um, and I know I have some of my favorites, but are there any Roy stories you can share with us today?
Okay. I'll tell a veterans one, and first I'm gonna tell one that's really funny that he told all the time when he was like in his young 20s. It has nothing to do with being a veteran. He was on a motorcycle, which like he was not a motorcycle rider that I knew. And he was like at a stoplight, like I'm super cool, and there were these girls next to him. And the light turned green and he went to go, and the bike went, but he didn't. So that was a good story that he told to humble himself, perhaps. What's kind of funny, I laugh, and I'm going to tell the owl story.
Yeah.
So he would talk about being in Vietnam and being with like the kids and the local families. And there was this boy who visited them often, and he always had an owl on his shoulder. It was like his pet.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, days or weeks later, the boy visited my dad and the others in his troop or whatever the word is. And they said, "Oh, where's I forget the owl's name?" And the boy just goes, "We eat him." And the way dad told that story, "We eat him." Like it
Yep.
was a story that it brought laughter. It brought and dad had a way of telling stories, but also listening to stories. And he would laugh so hard he would cry, and he would kind of like snort a little. And it's if you see pictures of him and you picture the story that he told you, I'm sure you can imagine, just that hard, hearty, honest laugh that he had, which was a wonderful compliment to the really serious side of him that worked so hard for veterans and their families. I think when there's hard times, from a person's past, present, or future, you have to find humor. And I think that he kind of demonstrated that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that action that 100% is the story that comes
Yeah,
to mind when I remember Roy is that owl story. And you're right, he did such a good job of, he tells you about the backstory and the
yeah,
relationship with the boy and how he had a younger brother who sent clothes and stuff from the United States and they shared it with the boy and he became like the troop mascot himself, right? And they all get so attached to that owl, and then the big culture
yeah.
shock, we eat him.
We eat him like it was no big deal, which it probably wasn't,
Right, right,
you know?
right. Right. It was a wonderful illustration, and to be able to bring that kind of levity to something as horrific as Vietnam and, just the humanity in his stories and how he could always, create a whether it was a metaphor or something to, really communicate that was it was pretty magic.
I was
Um,
fortunate to have read, I don't know for folks out there who are readers of historical fiction, there's a book called The Women by Kristen Hanna that came out I think in early February, about women during Vietnam. And I very purposefully read that right when it came out because we knew that Dad was dying, and so I was able to finish it before he passed away, and I was able to talk to him about sort of the women's experience and his observations and what his friends experienced. So
yeah. Yes,
stories on all ends.
yes, I read that too, and it is profound.
Yes.
It is profound. I'm glad to hear that you got to talk to him about it before he passed, because I can imagine he would have been sharing that as well, showing up with copies of it, sharing it with people.
Yeah, he probably would have.
Mhm. So, I remember your dad, obviously, as this great storyteller and his wisdom and his compassion, and just he was so welcoming. And also fierce in his advocacy, but in the best way. So, how do you want the world to remember Roy?
I I want the world to remember him as a wonderful human being. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and when I say to the veterans out there that he dedicated so much of himself to help all of you, I mean it. Um, I'll actually, knowing that this question was coming, I'd like to read just a really small, short piece from thoughts from my brother. My dad, there's five of us, and my brother Jason kind of beautifully sort of described my dad. He offered himself to those he loved and was always willing to embrace them exactly as they were. He provoked deep ideas and could sometimes confound others with them, but would always deliver a thoughtful response that came straight from his core. The love he felt for each and every member of his family and the many others who he touched and was touched by was deep and true and will continue to persist in each of us forever.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's definitely Roy. It sounds like Roy. And, he started that statement with the people he loved. I feel like Roy showed compassion and love to everybody, just
Yes.
everybody.
Yep.
And he just embraced humanity, and he shared his wisdoms, and he just, yeah, he was a pretty amazing human. It's been a pleasure
Thank
recalling your dad today. And as as a whole person, a veteran, a dad, I'm so glad we could get together and remember Roy today and honor him on Veterans Day.
you.
So thank you, Lee.
In Vietnam, his name was Sam. He was a little Vietnamese kid about 6. He would go around to all the different platoons, and he would visit each of us, every day. Sam always had this owl on his shoulder. Sam became a favorite, and my little brother, he was now just about to go in Social Security. He was also a vet. But when I had been in OCS, I had gotten him some Army gear, and I sent it to him, and he had worn it. So I'd written him a story about Sam, and he sent those their clothes so that Sam could wear the clothes. One day Sam shows up to talk, and Sam doesn't have the owl. Hey, Sam, where's your owl? He says, we eat him.